I'm not Assyrian, and I think any community, it's helpful to have scholars who are studying the US who are just American. There wouldn't be perspective. You need people who are not American to look at it. And so for any group that studied, that balance of perspective is really absolutely essential.
Hello everyone, Adessa here, and it's so good to be back on the Assyrian podcast to bring you this week's episode 92 with Dr. Erin Hughes. Before I dive into her story, a bit of personal news. I consider the Assyrian podcast listeners to be a part of the Assyrian podcast family, so it brings me great joy to share with you that Asher and I brought our first child into this world on February 2nd of this month. Her name is Enuma Elish, after the Assyrian creation story, and we have been obsessed ever since. Just give me a little bit of time and I'll get her trained to be a host in no time. Okay. Now on to Erin. She may not be Assyrian, but she might as well be, as she's been invested in Assyrian relations for some time now. Back in October of 2019, I had spent some time in California and was able to coordinate a time to sit down and learn more about her super cool position as an assistant professor and director of the Sarguis Assyrian Heritage Project at California State University, Stanislaus in Turlock, California. Dr. Hughes will also be speaking at the Assyrian Studies Symposium happening next month in Miami, Florida on March 20th to 22nd. So if you'll be attending, don't miss out on her presentation. Support for this week's episode of the Assyrian podcast is brought to you by Tony Kalogerakis and the injury lawyers of Illinois and New York. If you know anyone that has been in a serious accident, please reach out to Tony Kalogerakis. Tony has been recognized as a top 40 lawyer and a rising star by Super Lawyers publication and has obtained multiple multi-million-dollar awards. Tony can be reached at injuryrights.com or 847-982-9516. Now, without further ado, here is Dr. Erin Hughes. So I want to open this up first with going over a little bit of your education. You have a bachelor's in history and political science from McGill University in Montreal, Canada.
Yes.
Are you Canadian?
Canada. I wish I were Canadian. I was working for the Canadian government the past 2 years, and I feel like I'm an honorary Canadian now, but not yet.
Where were you born?
I was born in Detroit.
In Detroit, Michigan. Yeah. Nice. And then you got a master's in nationalism, ethnic conflict at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland.
Yes.
And then a PhD in sociology also at that university in 2016. And we'll talk about this a little bit later with regards to your dissertation, which is titled An American Atra, Boundaries of Diasporic Nation Building Amongst Assyrians and Chaldeans in the United States, which I'm really excited to talk about. But before we get into there, talk me through each of your degrees and sort of what led you to decide to pursue them.
Starting with Canada, or
yeah,
part of to
so
be
how did someone from Detroit end up in Montreal?
That's a really good question. I don't remember that well. I know cost was a huge factor. It was cheaper to be an international student at the time at McGill than it was to go in-state to like University of Michigan. So that was a huge factor for sure. I remember going on like a road trip with my parents. We looked at McGill, we looked at Queen's in Kingston, and we looked at U of T in Toronto. And it's totally superficial. The reason I went to Montreal was they didn't have housing, so I had to live in an apartment, and that was the most exciting, attractive reason to move anywhere at that age. So that led me to McGill. And when I was there, I had a class on nationalism, and I was just absolutely hooked on that as a concept as to why nations secede and why conflict happens, and just kind of explaining so much of the political factors that happened over the past 2 centuries. And so that's what drove me to Edinburgh, because they had a program specific to studying nationalism. And
what is nationalism?
Yeah, it's kind of two sides. One way it's framed is kind of this idea of making a nation and a political unit congruent. So kind of the idea that a nation, whether it's an ethnic group or a linguistic group or a people of some sort, pursue some sort of political autonomy, a quest to control their own politics and their own destiny. And so there are branches of nationalism that are independence movements and people's aspirations for rights and inclusion. And then the dark side of it is sometimes that can lead to expelling people who are non-nationals and genocide and ethnic conflict. So it's kind of a span of a lot of political turmoil and better understanding that over the past while. Yeah.
And so that led you to go to Scotland and Edinburgh.
Yeah.
So you're, I guess, an international student in both respects.
Yeah, it's interesting teaching in the US now because I don't really know how American universities work, so it's definitely a learning process. And, in Canada it wasn't such an issue because there's so many favorable policies for US immigration, but in the UK, the experience of being an immigrant, I mean, obviously a very privileged immigrant in that sense as a student, an American student at that, but you did have a bit of experience with the mess that is the visa process, and so that was very eye-opening and a good perspective to have as well. Yeah.
And you decided to stay there for your PhD as well.
Yeah, I came back to the US to work for Obama on the campaign and then worked in the US for a few years, always knowing...
What were you doing with the campaign?
I did field operations in Michigan, so like on the ground, mobilizing voters, mobilizing volunteers. It's the best part of campaigning because it's so community building, face-to-face. It's so exciting and fun. So I did that. I always with the idea I was going to go back to do my PhD, and I really wanted to go to Edinburgh. My supervisor there was amazing. The professors there are, wonderful. It's a really great community. And then I happened to work for Congressman Sandy Levin for a few years. He represents Michigan or suburban Detroit. And that's actually how I came on to working on Assyrian and Chaldean issues for my dissertation topic was, sectarian conflict in Iraq was happening. We were receiving a lot of advocacy from community organizations in Michigan, but also across the country, urging the US to do more to help. And that kind of fueled what my PhD research was going to be.
Okay, that's perfect because that was going to be the segue to my question and my next question, which was, how did you come to be familiar with the Assyrian community?
Yeah, growing up in Detroit, I was already really familiar with the Chaldean community. A lot of classmates and friends growing up were Chaldean. And then I'm a little embarrassed to say it wasn't until later I learned about the Assyrian community and that's the same people. And so that also helped fuel my research because I thought that was really interesting and really embarrassing that I did not know this connection. And so that led to looking to better understand these diasporic or these boundaries between peoples and how they come to be and how they are maintained.
Could you talk me through your dissertation? Because the title in and of itself is really interesting.
Oh, thank you. That was the very last part of it I wrote. I had the hardest time coming up with the title. I wanted to look at how people respond to crisis in the homeland, how a diaspora mobilizes. And I started researching that and realized that I needed to better understand the groundwork of Assyrian and Chaldeanness in the US and kind of what those mean, because there were people lobbying under different names. And so to be respectful of that and how to amplify people's messages and voices. So then it became looking at how diasporas are formed, how they're maintained, how they're perpetuated through generations. And so navigating all of these different institutions, the church, political organizations, community organizations, and how in each locality they help amplify understandings of what it means to be Chaldean, what it means to be Assyrian or Syriac, and how these communities relate to each other. And yeah, so it's kind of interrogating those boundaries of what do these different identities mean, why have different identities emerged in different places or been sustained in different places.
And as you were taking your coursework, both within your master and PhD, at what point were you like, I think I'm going to have my dissertation, my research revolve around the Assyrian Chaldean community?
From the PhD, at the very beginning, in the UK, when you apply to do a PhD, you submit a research proposal. And so my research proposal was very specific to looking at how Assyrians and Chaldeans were responding to the post-2003 war climate. And because at the time, my thought was, my interest is in ethno-sectarian conflict and kind of looking at from that end. And then from a practical point...
For those that might not necessarily understand or know what that means, could you... Yeah. For those of us non-nerdy academics, what does that mean?
Why conflict happens and why it takes shape along ethnic or sectarian or some combination thereof lines. So why suddenly a society where people are living together changes and some group becomes marginalized and violently pushed out? Why does that happen? And how do we rebuild a society after so it doesn't happen again? So my thought originally was framing it very much just around that. But then the challenges of researching that were difficult because there wasn't a lot of safety. ISIS happened as I was doing my research and all of that. So my focus became looking at these dynamics from a diasporic perspective and just really focusing on the US because it's the largest diaspora. I already had contacts there and it just kind of made sense to look at it in that framework.
And your research consisted of mixed method qualitative approach, which included interviews and participant observation, document research, and archival research. What did you find in your research? Or like key takeaways?
I think one of the biggest impressions I took away across all of it was just the resiliency of people just so passionately and strongly and consistently advocating, on behalf of their people despite frustration and setbacks. And from the time I did work in the British National Archives looking at like World War I era documents, through interviewing people, after the 2003 war as ISIS was happening, and just the resiliency of Assyrian nationalism and the Assyrian people in tirelessly advocating on behalf of Assyrians, I thought was just incredibly inspiring, and something that a lot of times when we talk about conflict, it's very much framed as oppressors and victims and kind of the agency of people's loss. And so I think just being able to highlight that agency and how much people do and how much people work to fight back and try to do something meaningful and impactful.
I know so often Assyrians look within their own respective communities to say, hey, we need more scholars, we need more people in respective academic fields, well, in all fields, but including academic fields. But it also says something, and is also very cool when there's people out there who are interested in Assyrian relations, Assyrian matters, who may not ethnically be Assyrian, but have a vested interest. Did anything kind of open your eyes during the different people that you had met and the research that you had done?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many incredible Assyrian scholars that for those of us who are not Assyrian, I don't know that we'd have the same insight and perspectives that we're able to gain. There's just so many incredible stories and firsthand accounts about experiences of migrating to the US and building communities here and building civic organizations and being able to talk with people who are involved in that process and why it was meaningful to them, why they put so much work into building these organizations. And people talked about the pride of, where I came from was Repassa. Here we have Assyrian newspapers, we have Assyrian television stations, these clubs have Assyrian on it. The pride in being able to do that and the talent across the diaspora and helping build and create these things. Definitely that. And I think your point is really important because I'm not Assyrian, and I think any community, it's helpful to have scholars who are studying the US who are just American. There wouldn't be perspective. You need people who are not American to look at it. And so for any group that studied, that balance of perspective is really absolutely essential. My work builds off of so many Assyrian voices that have contributed so valuably to this conversation.
Is there a moment that stands out to you in terms of your research, whether it was meeting with different people, observing?
Probably for me, obviously, just talking to people who were so incredibly generous with their time and like the information they provided, and realizing this isn't, for the most part, this isn't people's full-time jobs. They're doing all of this work as a side project in a way, and the commitment, dedication, despite having a full-time job on top of that, it's perpetually inspiring. And then when I was in northern Iraq about 2.5 years ago, I think just seeing the work of so many people trying to help rebuild and steer resources to the Nineveh plain and all of that was just beyond inspiring. Like, I think that's just something that's permanently embedded into how much work people are doing with not enough support doing it, and just that resiliency and commitment was... Yeah.
And was your trip to Iraq a part of your research as well?
Yeah, I had finished my PhD at that time, and I was looking at what I wanted to do with my research going forward, and so trying to inform what my postdoc work would look like.
Where did you visit in Iraq?
So I was based in Erbil, and then we went to, I was there most of the time, Slimani. I went to Dahuk very briefly, and then I was in Bartella with Normati from Shama Foundation was kind enough to take me out there.
Very cool, which we've also had on the podcast. That's always nice to have that type of connection there. And I'm sure you had a chance to meet with a lot of different Assyrians on the ground as well.
Yeah, I mean, the same there. People were just so incredibly generous with time and information and trying to share the challenges that... At the time I was there, ISIS hadn't yet been defeated from Mosul, and so it was just...
Oh, so you were there at a dangerous time.
It was fine. People just were in such a limbo, right? Because, you don't know when ISIS is going to be totally defeated, what the situation of your home looks like, what resources are going to be driven, if you're going to be able to return. And so like that just limbo and that frustration that, you know, people have been in limbo for years was so palpable and understandable, and unfortunately still not totally resolved.
Yeah, I will say that earlier this year when Asha and I had a chance to go to Iraq, ISIS had been liberated by that time, but the feelings that people were having there was like, well, we want to be here as long as we can, as long as there isn't this instability. So if there is no instability, why not? We want to make a life here, we want to create and maintain our life here, but you never know type of thing. Exactly. Like you can't absolutely guarantee what will come in a year, in 5 years, and 10 years. So
exactly. Yeah. And you see the protests that are happening in Iraq now and the government's violent response, and it just levels, you know, at layers to that uncertainty. Yeah, definitely. It's such a shame.
What has your previous work consisted of prior to you landing your current position? And where did those positions take you location-wise? So you mentioned the Obama campaign, you mentioned you were in Dallas. What led you to those opportunities and locations?
It's a host of randomness, honestly. My first job out of undergrad was working for Congressman Sandy Levin in his district office in suburban Detroit, and I did immigration work there. And so that was still, I think, one of the most interesting jobs I've had, because it was, you know, a chance to actively help people who were navigating a very difficult bureaucracy. So I did that for a couple of years. I went to Scotland, I came back, worked on an Obama campaign, and then went back to work for Sandy Levin in his DC office, where I did legislative issues on foreign policy and homeland security and immigration. And the same thing, it's being able to hear from people from Michigan and also across the country on issues that they're so passionate about and concerned about. And, you know, the role that the U.S. plays in these situations was really illuminating and helped shape what I wanted my research to be. When I graduated from that, I actually went to work on the Hillary campaign. And then I'm trying to think.
And were you doing the same thing as you were doing with the Obama campaign?
Yeah, field operations as well in Michigan. Did not go so well, unfortunately. And then I actually randomly got a job. I was looking for a job. Academia is notoriously difficult to find a position in. I had taught part-time at Eastern Michigan University, and then found a job working for the Canadian Foreign Service. And so I did that for the past 2 years in Dallas, Texas, at the consulate there. We did political issues, advocating on behalf of Canada and cultural diplomacy in the southern US, which was wonderful. And then I was at a conference, and I can't remember if it was MESA, Middle East Studies Association, or a historical one in Chicago, but one of my co-panelists mentioned that her previous job was opened and it specialized in modern Assyrian history, and I should look into it. And I was very eager to get back to academia, and so it just, everything kind of fell into place wonderfully at once.
That's amazing. But wow, you have traveled quite a bit. So Detroit to Montreal to Edinburgh, Scotland, to DC, Dallas, and now in Modesto, Turlock, California. And some joke that it's the capital of Assyria within diaspora. So how fitting given your dissertation work.
It's the perfect place to be.
Let's talk a little bit about what you do there, because you just got to Stanislaus State in August. End of August.
Literally just started.
So I'll read for listeners about the Sarguis Modern Assyrian Heritage Project, and then we can talk a little bit more about that. But established in fall 2017, the Sarguis Modern Assyrian Heritage Project brings new and emerging research in Assyrian studies to Stanislaus State University. That's in Turlock, California. Working in collaboration with the Sarguis Modern Assyrian Heritage Collection and the Vasche LIbrary. Project facilitates student projects and research documenting Assyrian history and culture, with a special emphasis on Assyrians in California. Project offers courses in Assyrian history, hosts Assyrian speakers on campus, supports Assyrian students on campus, and funds an annual research fellowship to drive student research into all aspects of modern Assyrian heritage. It's hosted by the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences and the Department of History. Woo! So you said that you learned about the position through a co-panelist at one of the conferences. So this episode probably won't be released until early 2020.
Awesome.
So if you could just talk a little bit about what are the things that you are working on or planning on working on from now to the next few months or so.
Absolutely. Well, that's actually a great framing because we're kind of meeting to plan, right? There are a couple of things that were put into place before I came in. Dr. Stacey Farenthold was the first person to hold this position and is now at UC Davis. So she did a wonderful job laying groundwork of framing a modern Assyrian history class and diasporas of the Middle East class. So I'm teaching in both of those and then looking to think about what else I can develop going forward in Assyrian history. So thought I have is trying to do some sort of honors or graduate class in Assyrian nationalism or something, you know, so just kind of thinking creatively about other classes we could do in that area. And so as your description laid out, there's a couple of streams to the Modern Assyrian History Project. So one is our library collection. The library's purchased, I think they have about 200 or so different books and volumes and things like that.
And these are books that any student on campus can go and access and check out?
Exactly, yep. And they're all housed together and there's a special, our library's under construction right now, so they're kind of in these annexes, but even in the annex, it's, you know, Modern Assyrian History Collection at the top. As soon as you walk in, you see it, and all the books are kind of housed together, which is great because they're super accessible and, you know, makes it visible for other people who aren't necessarily looking for modern Assyrian history and don't know what it is, and, you know, it's right there to see and, you know, hopefully catches people's eyes. So kind of thinking about the direction that we continue want to take that, what collections could we try to acquire, you know, political documents, things that we can digitize and share through that.
Where is the majority of the collection of books from? Is it from one person? Is it from multiple people? Do you know?
From what I've seen so far, they've just purchased all the books they could find that mentioned Assyrians, Chaldeans, or Syriacs. It's really comprehensive so far. I know that they've acquired, I think they have a couple of back issues of Assyrian Star and a couple of other magazines, something that I think we'd be very eager to expand on those holdings as well. And then one of the thoughts we have is reaching out to organizations and ask if they'd be willing to share some of their documents about their founding or about work they've done and that, you know, scholars can access, that we could house together and hopefully digitize, and scholars studying these issues can access going forward. And then thinking about other ways to build it. So I know one of the ideas Dr. Farenthold had was oral history projects, especially of Assyrians in California and the Turlock area. I know that there's a couple of other oral history projects that are going on, so I want to kind of get the lay of the land. I don't want to duplicate or redo people's efforts that are already happening. So reaching out to organizations and people who are already working in that space to figure out, you know, how we can be helpful, kind of where gaps are that we can fill. And then the other aspect is wanting to do things that are more visible. So thinking of bringing speakers or conferences or small seminars we can house at Stan State that are both for students and members of the community to participate in. So there's a couple of different streams. We're just starting to plan on what we can do this year and what we continue to build on over the next, 3, 4, 5 years.
Nice. And because it's still relatively young.
Yes.
Do you have the freedom to mold this into however?
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, I think of what we want to do and propose it in consultation with Mr. Sarguis and with the dean of the college. We'll sit together and think about what makes sense and what ideas to kind of go with.
Do you know what led Mr. Sarguis to create the Modern Assyrian Heritage Project at Stanislaus State?
My understanding is it had been something he had been thinking about doing for a while. I believe he was involved with the Journal of Assyrian Academic Studies, back in the day, and wanted to contribute to supporting Assyrian scholarship. And I believe he focused it on modern Assyrian history just to, have something that's really special to studying Assyrians now and things that have happened over the past 200 years. I think the modern history is framed longer than that. Just kind of focusing on now. And he wanted to focus on modern Assyrian history to kind of move past conversations about empire and antiquity and really focus on factors that have shaped the Assyrian nation over the past several hundred years. And I don't know exactly his connection to Stan State. I believe his mother lived in Turlock for a while. I think he may have gone there for a brief period before going to Berkeley. And I know that because of, the size and vibrancy of the Assyrian population in Turlock, that was also a factor to have local community that was engaged and would want to be engaged in these conversations and kind of developing things further. So I think those factors are led there, but I might be wrong.
Well,
Any point there.
We'll also need to get Mr. Sarguis on the podcast.
I think that would be amazing.
And hear, a little bit about his background and
a wealth
threading
of
the connection.
Yes, exactly. A wealth of information and insight.
Yeah. The next question I was going to ask is, what has the Assyrian Heritage Project done to date? And you'd mentioned the two classes previously. Have you had speakers come on campus or anything like that through the project?
I wanted to say Sargon Danabad came, but he might have just kind of done a voice. I don't know if he physically came or did a video chat with the Modern Assyrian History class. Yeah, I apologize. I can't remember. Yeah.
And within the classes that you're teaching, remind me again the names of them?
Right. So this semester I'm teaching Modern Assyrian History, and then I don't think it's ever been taught. There's a framework for a Middle Eastern diasporas course that hopefully I'll have a chance to teach next year, and then I'm looking to kind of develop a few new classes. Yeah.
And within the Modern Assyrian History class, do you have any Assyrians in the class?
I believe we have one.
Yes. All right. Holding it down for the Assyrian people. Wow. So, there's a clear need that I think the information about it just needs to be dispersed more, because we have so many Assyrians in Modesto and attending Stanislaus State, especially Modesto Turlock area, that I'm sure would love to take a class and learn more about their history. Do you know if it's going to be something that will be taught again in future semesters?
My hope is that it's taught at least one semester every year. So hopefully we can get the word out. And I don't know if it was taught last year, because I don't know if Stacy was here. But yeah, so my hope is that it'll be taught every year. We can get the word out and get Assyrian students engaged.
Totally. Do you know, is there anything like this for Assyrians currently set up in other universities that you know of?
I know at Berkeley they have a program, although I think it primarily focuses on ancient history, but I do know that they're hiring a fellow there, which is so exciting. It's wonderful to see so much attention being brought to this, because anything to amplify that. I think there's a temporary posting they're bringing to UCLA, but I might be wrong about that. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I know that there's a couple of Syriac programs. I think there's one in Australia and a couple other places. I don't know enough about them to know if they're primarily focused on history and linguistics, or if it's politically driven as well. Yeah,
so this might be unique in its respect of having a modern sort of Assyrian lens and focus.
Exactly. Wow. I think so. I hope so.
How do you hope to gain fulfillment, and what do you hope to accomplish in your role?
That's such a good question. A couple of streams to that. One is, obviously the teaching aspect, and just kind of bringing attention to Assyrian issues, bringing attention to, that it's an active, living, vibrant, talented, resilient community, and there are a lot of serious issues in the homeland that need attention, and kind of amongst students helping them be better informed amongst that. For the project itself, just finding ways to contribute and engage with the community in Turlock in a way that's meaningful, whether it's charting histories and bringing speakers and just contributing to the discussions and activity that's already taking place in an already vibrant community. And then for my own research, working on turning my dissertation into a book, contributing, doing more research in that field, and publishing. Yeah.
Is there a huge focus on that at Stanislaus State as well?
Definitely the focus is on instruction. Our course load is, I think, obviously higher than an R1 research university would be. But for this position, I think it's really important. If you're heading something on modern Assyrian history, you need to publish in modern Assyrian history and help amplify scholarship in that field. So my own focus is definitely needs to be on that.
How can other universities model the Sarguis Modern Assyrian Heritage Project? What is needed for something like that? Is it someone who has a lot of money and has a connection to the university and is like, I want to put this, and the university is like, yes? Or is it much more complicated than that?
I think that there's definitely an argument to that. I think, some universities already have Middle Eastern or West Asian studies departments, or things that one could tap into and be like, I want to have kind of what they're doing at Berkeley, a visiting scholar position or some sort of privately funded or something focusing specifically on that. I don't want to sound cynical, but money is always a driving factor. So I imagine that definitely helps to kind of bring that focus. then ensure that focus remains there is the funding stream.
Yeah, it just seems like something like this is so vital, especially for a group of people that don't have an official land for themselves. If they're able to, within their diasporic communities, be able to set up something like this, it allows for sustainability for not just for research, for modern research, if it is for modern Assyrian studies, and can be a motivator for students, Assyrian or non-Assyrian,
right,
to be able to get into the field or want to do more research on that if there is opportunities available.
Absolutely. And I think that's probably one of the other thoughts we have going forward is looking at how students can do research in conjunction with this project. And I can't speak to that yet because I'm kind of new and don't know the lay of the land there. But yeah, even especially for students who want to go on to careers in advocacy or into master's programs or whatever, that hopefully there's something there that interests them and that they can continue to carry forward, or as teachers themselves or whatever the case may be, but across a variety of fields. It's a really, really exciting opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Your time in the Central Valley has been short thus far, but first impressions, you've kind of traveled and been all over the world, so what's it like to now live in Central Valley?
I can't believe I'm saying this, but coming from Dallas, it changed my perspective. The weather here is beautiful. Even when it's 100 degrees, I'm like, oh, it's not humid. This is gorgeous. But yeah, it's lovely. Yes, it really does. It really does. Yeah, the food is surprisingly good. So we've been very happy so far. Nice. Yes.
Have you had much interaction with like the Assyrian community there thus far, or like any events or anything like that?
They had this was planned before I got here, so I cannot take any credit. But they had Omar Al-Bashir, I think his name is, the oud player comp. Yeah. He is, oh my god,
you're able to go?
Crazy talented. Wow. Yeah, that was wonderful. Yeah, he was really talented. There was an art exhibition. I apologize, I've forgotten the artist's name. That happened just before that. So I had a chance to briefly meet, a couple people who run the civic organization, a civic club and things like that. So I need to follow up with them and sit down and just learn.
Get acquainted with everything in due time anyways.
Yeah, hopefully, yes. Yeah. yes.
And now for some fun questions. How often, if at all, have you had Assyrian food, and what are your favorite Assyrian dishes, if you can name one? Or
dolma's not specifically Assyrian, but I will pretend that's yes.
It's popular in Assyrian households, yeah.
It's incredibly good. Actually, I've not been to a Syrian restaurant here yet, which is a shame. I've been to Sunrise Bakery, which I think is Assyrian. Mm-hmm. But in Detroit, there are a couple of good places, I think in Sterling Heights. But yeah, I need to.
In Modesto, there's a place that opened up not too long ago called Betty's Kebabs.
Oh, good to know.
And right next to it, there's a place called Babylon Market, which has like all of the market goods.
Awesome.
Really
That's a wonderful
really
thing.
Really good treats.
Excellent.
So I haven't had Betty's Kebab, but I mean, it is Assyrian owned. I've heard really great things about it. So
I will be checking that out probably tonight, if I'm being honest.
For sure. Have you had a chance to learn any Assyrian vocabulary along the years?
No. So I thought to myself, I'm going to be stable in Turlock for a while. I need to find an Assyrian language program, and the only one I found is for children. And I'm debating if I'm confident enough to sit amongst kids and learn Assyrian or not.
You're right. They do tend to be focused more on kids.
Yeah.
But I'm sure if there were enough adults who expressed interest, that there would be classes done in that sense too.
Well, and because I hope to go back to Northern Iraq either the spring semester or next January, and so being able to communicate even minimally would be just a really wonderful thing to be able to do.
Anyone that's listening, if you would like to give instruction for adults who are interested in learning how to speak,
please contact us.
Yes, please contact Erin. She'd be very interested.
I would be very interested.
So I have to ask you this, now that you are someone who has, I would say you now have an involvement within the Assyrian community. You know people, you know your connections. Within our own community, we know our quarrels and our weaknesses. We know our strengths too, but we know the politics of what it is with our civic organizations and churches divisions and all that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. And we kind of keep it within, right?
Yeah.
Not a lot of people from outside will be like, oh yeah, we totally know what's going on. But how have have you been able to still maintain a sense of, I don't know if positivity isn't the right word, but sticking with it and not being like, oh my gosh, these Assyrian people are all over the place, right? And to be fair, like, Assyrians aren't the only group of people that experience
everyone
that.
is all over the place. And
I think sometimes because we're so into it, we're like, are we the only ones that deal with these issues?
No, I feel like Assyrians, I feel like Assyrians are so much harder on themselves about like divisions than Warrens, because every community has massive divisions. And like, of course, the name issue sometimes complicates when people are lobbying Washington or whatever, but every community has major divisions, that whether it's religious divisions or identity or points of origins, it's incredibly hard to build a diaspora. And the fact that people from different countries of origins and slightly different dialects and different religious and all these different experiences still maintain being Assyrian identity and being Assyrian and working on behalf of the Assyrian people, that's incredibly difficult to do, and it's being done really well. And you've seen, from a political perspective, you've seen advocacy has become stronger and more impactful and reaching more and more people. And you've seen incredible success in being able to influence members of Congress and to get funding for Nineveh Blame Protection Unit. And, all of these things that have emerged are entirely the credit of diasporic activism. And so, there's no... Everyone's divided.
Like, selfishly, when I hear like my friends who are like not Assyrian talk about their stuff, I'm just like, I don't know. In a way, this is like a breath of fresh air to know.
Yes.
I'm sorry that you also have to deal with this, but like at least we're not the only ones. This is not like these are not unique issues that are particular to the Assyrian people. So
and it certainly feels
we need to give ourselves more credit.
Yes, so much more credit. And the stakes are higher, and people are grappling with incredibly difficult issues where there's not really a right answer. And give yourselves all the credit, sincerely.
Okay. Erin, we have listeners from all over the world. Mm-hmm. If you had one message for them, what would that be?
Oh, that's a big question. As we look at the Assyrian diaspora, and it's such an incredibly global diaspora, what all of these diasporic populations have been able to build and maintain, and talent and dedication, resiliency and commitment is just absolutely inspiring and amazing, and kind of illuminates the resiliency of Assyrianness. And I don't know how to say this in a way that doesn't sound incredibly cheesy, but everything that's been built and all of the talent is absolutely inspiring.
Thanks for tuning in. Real quick, I have a favor to ask before we close out. We appreciate all of the feedback we've received on the podcast thus far. If you could take a minute after this to rate and review us wherever you listen to us, we'd greatly appreciate it. We love reading what you have to say. Thanks again, and see you next week.